So I am here with Nick today and Nancy. And Nancy may just be a listener today, but she's also been told she's more than welcome to join in, who has some history in recovery. And Nick and I have worked together for a long time, and uh, sometimes more successfully than others. But that's the road, the process. So, Nick, we had a conversation yesterday that I thought would be interesting for other people because I felt that your awareness of your mother in her condition as she's fading and as you're witnessing your mother fading, that you were extremely sensitive and aware of a process that is often difficult to face, but you were talking about it openly enough that I felt it would be not only healthy to continue to talk about, but also informative for people to listen to, because it isn't something that I have experienced people do very well, which is face the death of someone close. And I don't think there's anyone in the world any of us are closer to than a mother. None of us lived in anyone other than our mothers.
Yeah, I agree. You're one of the people I've turned to. It's been a really terrific journey for me. I had 8 years of sobriety. I relapsed. I had a hard time getting back into the program. I was very destructive and could not beat the obsession, and I could not beat the lying, and I could not beat the ego. And I wouldn't stand up, and I wouldn't tell the truth. And I wouldn't tell the truth to the people that were rooting for me, that were there for me, that I felt loved me unconditionally. And it was just a disappointment and a pride issue, thinking that I could do it by myself when I couldn't. And the only person I was really hurting was myself. And I had an incredible experience in the middle of the night with God and honesty and asking for help. And when I got completely honest, and that conversation started with me howling like a wolf at 3 o'clock in the morning with 7 years of chronic relapsing. And by the way, the definition of chronic is consistently ill and rarely well, and when well, has a tendency to relapse. And I had the mind of a chronic alcoholic. And I finally woke up in the middle of the night. And for 7 years, I don't think I could get 2 weeks. And when I would relapse and would sleep for 16, 17, 18 hours, and I would wake up the next day after a 3-day run, 2-day run, the first words out of my mouth were, "I will never do that again. That is it. It is over." And I genuinely believed that. And the obsession was so overwhelming, so great that I could not pick up the phone and ask for help. And the tediousness of the need for drugs and the detox, I would just run to the dealer's house. And so after 7 years, one night I woke up in the middle of the night and I started yelling at God, and I started yelling at him. And I went to Catholic school from kindergarten through college. And I started saying the F word to God. I started blaming him for everything. I had a broken back at the time. My financial situation was upside down. I blamed him for that. My relationship with my father was non-existent. My sister's relationship, it was poor. My friends, just everything. I blamed him for the traffic, for crime, for noise. And I had a moment of clarity, and I just said, "Oh my God," I said, "I blame everybody for everything." And it's kind of what we were talking about before, like yesterday and before this meeting started, me, you, and Nancy, that we're responsible for everything. And it was the first time in a very long time, I think, even when I had those years of sobriety before the relapse, that I took accountability. And so I said, "Oh my gosh," I said, I blame everyone for everything. I don't take accountability. And I just said, "God, I want to change my life, and I don't want to change it tomorrow. I want to change it now. I'm scared. Please help me. Please show yourself to me. I want to be born again, a different life, not like a born again Christian, but a new set of values, to have virtue." And I sincerely, sincerely meant it. And I sincerely saw in the first time that I was emotionally immature and distorted in my thinking, delusional thinking, and a blamer. And like I just had this moment of clarity. I looked up and the room looked different. There was a clarity. I went to sleep, and when I woke up, the clarity was still with me, and the experience of that conversation and that yelling with God and that response was still with me. And I picked up the phone and I asked for help, and I couldn't walk. I was on crutches for 8 months, off and on, and rehabilitation 4 to 5 times a week for 16 months. And I started asking for rides to meetings, and sometimes I would take the bus to meetings, and you would help me get to meetings, um, and I made that first, and so that was my journey back. And
Well, and the broken back also, if I remember right, had you sleeping on your knees on the floor because you couldn't get comfortable laying flat.
my spine was you know, my spine was so off that I couldn't lay straight out, and I would fall asleep like in a kneeling position, like a Buddhist praying, and then I would wake up, and I was up for I would sleep 3 hours a night for a long time, and the only time I would sleep longer than that was when I would pass out of exhaustion, and so yeah.
So it only took breaking your back to get you to kneel and bend a knee.
I'm lucky it took that. I was pretty defiant and insisted on making drugs work or stopping on my own. But yes, and I
And I
and
think
I
I think it's interesting that a broken back is really almost a metaphor for a broken front.
everything
You
was
know,
broken.
the
Everything was
inability
broken.
the inability to face what's actually happening
Right.
and end up in a condition that was so crippling that you were sleeping on bent knees and eventually use that position to pray from, to just ask for something beyond the dilemma you were facing within the confines of your own thoughts.
You know, I have a lot of really good friends, and I have a lot of good people that I've surrounded myself with in the program, and that are not in the program, and I would hear some of the most amazing words of wisdom and insight and inspiration. But until I was ready, it just didn't mean a thing. Like it
Yeah,
had to be that innermost self that I was honest with. And like
yeah.
once that was, and once that door opened up for an inch, that door of clarity, I kicked it down. I did 202 meetings in my first 90 days. And and it was an incredible experience because I had this unhealthy relationship with money, and I still do at times, chasing, wanting more, but I would say I need to make more money, and it didn't matter how much money I was making, and I was decent at making money, and I still can be, and it didn't matter. Like I realized it didn't matter because no matter how much money I made, I I put it up my nose, I spent it at the bar or I spent it on the casinos, and when I decided to put sobriety in front of me, and sobriety in front of me meant coming to terms with my disease and that I needed help and that it wasn't working. And when I came to terms with that, money didn't matter all of a sudden, right? And I made lesser
And you
money,
also began to make it.
but in the beginning I was making lesser money, and but I was saving more because I wasn't using anymore, being destructive. And I remember when I got 30 days. This next week I'll have 8 years of sobriety again, and I remember when I got 30 days in this sobriety, and I tried for 7 years. And I was on the bus, and it was raining out. It sounds like a movie. And it was raining out, and I was on the bus, and I had my crutches next to me in the seat next to me, and this homeless lady was just staring at me, and she had her 6 bags next to her, and I was happy because I finally got 30 days, and I finally had like a smidge of peace of mind, and I felt like I had something, and I said, okay, you're going to continue to do this, and it's just been really, really beautiful. And like what happened like this past weekend, I flew to Philadelphia, and I put my mother in hospice, and I haven't thought about drinking or using once. I haven't thought about drinking or using once, and My sisters and we have a stressful relationship. And, I said a prayer before I went to Philadelphia. I said a prayer, a number of prayers on the plane. And I said a prayer in the taxi going to my mother's senior living place, that I was going to have pause and composure, and that I was going to handle everything, with respect and dignity, and have pause. And I did. And I was there to be a part of, my sisters have been dealing with my mother in Philadelphia for a long time. And I didn't have the right to come in and give orders, right? I came in to let them do what they've been doing, and to let them continue to be in charge, and not be the big brother who knows everything. And to be a part of it, and to watch them, continuously to, care for my mother. And it was that was one of the beautiful experiences that I just had over this weekend. And I said some really nice words to my sister, thanking them for, being dedicated and altering their lifestyle, and going through all this. And I had no idea my mom was this bad the last month. And they didn't share it with me. And they said it literally changed within a 72-hour period. And just as they were ready to call me to let me know, I had called them, and I had already booked a flight on the plane. And, so yeah.
And while your mother worried about you for many years, you also began to give her your attention as you got better, and spend time with her in this process for the last 8 years.
I've always had a beautiful relationship with my mother. I was always a mama's boy. And she was always a good woman to me. She was the greatest example of unconditional love I've ever seen. Her and my Shih Tzu. And, the thing about my mother, she was 100% Italian. She was very domesticated. She was intelligent. She was creative. She had a beautiful sense of humor. But her goal in life naturally was to be a really beautiful mom for her children, for her grandchildren, and also to be a good wife. And she had a beautiful home, and she cooked beautiful meals, and she went out of her way. And when I was a chronic relapser, I lived 3,000 miles away now for decades from my mom. And I had this extremely close relationship with her. I bragged to her when I was doing good. And I also shared with her my lows. And I just spoke with her the truth. And, we had an incredible bond over the phone, and I still have that. Nancy and I have a long distance relationship. And one of the reasons why is that we have very deep conversations by phone. And you and I are basically by phone, Jack. And my best friend in Philadelphia, Anthony, since college, we still have beautiful conversations. And with the right people, with the right feeling of the right people, they don't have to be in front of me. And I opened up to my mom and shared everything when I was frustrated with people at work, when I was relapsing, when I was going through breakups, when I did something really good at work, when I won an award or two at work. And I brought her in for the journey, and she would open up to me. And, it was really, really beautiful. And my father was a very good man. Everything I loved about my mom and dad, I became, and everything I disliked about my mom and my dad, I became. And I became a product of my environment. And, it wasn't until Alcoholics Anonymous and meeting people like you where I talked about my character defects and the things that were taking place to me. And I remember one time you said to me, I can't help you if you only share 80% of what's going on in the situation. You got to share the 100%. And, I lied to you for I think close to 4 years about my sobriety. And when I finally got honest with you, you thanked me, and then you said, I'm going to let you go. Apparently you don't trust me enough to be honest with me. And I'm asking you to get help with somebody else. I thought we had an honest relationship. And I was so defeated and in such acceptance of stopping to try and talk you into it. Not that I would have been able to, or to fight that, just for the sake of arguing, that I said, okay, I understand. And you know what? I wind up getting sober. And I think after a year and a half into this sobriety, I picked up the phone and I told you an update on how I was doing. And we started talking once every 2 weeks, and then once every 10 days, and once every week. And I asked you if we can give it a try again. And you said absolutely. And we did. And here we are. And now I'm your sponsor. And it feels Wait, what? Did I just say that? Okay. And
So
and we have a really terrific relationship.
one of the points,
And I even remember, Jack, in the beginning of this relationship that's been beautiful and honest, that you said, I don't trust you yet. There's times I don't trust you yet. And I didn't argue back. Like, I understood the consequences from years of lying, that it was going to be a rebuild, that it was going to take more. And not only with you, but with others.
yeah,
And, and it's just like, and that's okay. And so, yeah.
but that's still the case. There's always room for mistrust when mental conditions are not being addressed, and always room for mistrust when circumstances seem to be the problem and consequences seem to be the problem and other people and places and things seem to be the problem. But what I've really learned is that I absolutely trust that when those are the sources of the problems, there's lying attached to those ideas. Because ultimately, the responsibility, as you just described, when you came to terms with your condition with respect to cocaine and alcohol, when you got honest about it, that seeming, we call it a moment of clarity. What's clear about it is that we're being honest about something that has been happening for years, and we have been dishonest about what's been happening. And that clarity is a very profound experience to somebody who's been living in a delusional nightmare, making believe that that was who they are and what their life had not only become, but all that it is. That clarity is a very profound experience. And the reason I mention this is because that honesty is the potential of every moment we have every single day, all day long. The question is, I ask, am I being accurate about what's happening? And I've learned I don't have to be right. Honesty is about addressing if I am wrong and I am being dishonest. The honest thing is to admit I am wrong and I am dishonest. And sometimes I don't know until I say it. Sometimes I just say, I'm going to share a thought I'm having and I want you to hear it so that I can say it out loud and have some perspective on whether or not the weight of this thing I'm bearing actually is any more than the conflict I'm creating in the weight that I'm bearing.
Well, the opposite of clarity is lack of clarity. And, but if you're in the middle of it, you believe it's the truth. I was watching this Seinfeld
But
episode.
think of that for a second, though. To believe it's true because the conditions we create seem that way. Think how conniving that is. To create a condition that we then use to make believe a lie is true. Think of the inner conflict and the emotional turmoil and the mental anguish caused by that kind of thinking. And it's exactly what you and I work on. When you have problems today, what do we tend to loop back on? Once the story's told, we look back on, what are you doing? What are you thinking? What's your absolute part, not your side of the street? Because if you're just cleaning up your side of the street, you're living on a filthy street. The point is, what are you absolutely doing to cause this? Where is the dishonesty? Where are the thoughts you have that you are perpetuating that are causing the conflict? That's the growth in sobriety, because that's the actual factuality of the honesty and starting to see things accurately.
And, not only is it dishonest, before the dishonesty, getting honest about the situation is the emotional immaturity, the defiance, the self-centeredness, greed, right?
Those are all based on lies, by the way.
Right. And until
all
you
of them.
see it, right? And so, whenever you don't speak the truth, you get exactly what you deserve, right? And when you speak up the truth, the people you speak the truth with, they're either going to embrace it and work with you on it, or they're going to say, that's not for me, and walk away. But either way, that's a good thing. If they can't be with you because of your truth, or if they want to work with you, that response, it's beautiful, because you don't have to live the lie and that they're not supposed to be in your life. And that's difficult with, people that you're close with sometimes, or that you have a working relationship with sometimes, but it is what it is. And it's just like, so, I've grown to understand how important that is. And the other thing I've realized is like, it's really a beautiful world. I mean, there's a lot of chaos out there, and but it's, it just seems that if you do the right thing, more time, good things are going to happen to bad people, and bad things are going to happen to good people. But like, it's being within self, like living a life of virtue, that makes things a lot more balanced and easier to live a fuller life.
Well, if our nature is virtuous because it's natural, and it's moral because it's not immoral, and it's true because it's true, it just is as it is, and we begin to concede that in our thinking, rather than think we have to concoct truth or speak the truth or tell the truth, it becomes a lot easier to simply notice that thoughts are generally not right. Our conclusions are generally, if our conclusions were conclusive, we would never have to think about the thing that we just concluded again. And yet they always seem to lead to a little more thinking and a little refinement, a little adjustment, not only because circumstances are always changing, because everything is always changing, but our thinking about our thinking is always changing. And so in effect, it's always ending, it's always beginning. So it's never quite the truth in the absolute sense that truth is true, because truth is true doesn't change. In an absolute sense, if that's the premise of reality and truth, which are probably the same thing, they're just the fundamental basis of existence. If that's the basis, and we begin to introduce that to thinking, thinking has a very stable platform now to operate from, rather than thinking is our only source, which is constantly changing and creating the instability and the deformation of our ideas, literally the disintegration, because of that sense of feeling separate from the world, because we're thinking about things that aren't aligned with what's actually happening. Those are all impositions and induced by our choices that we make. And then the belief in them as being right and being real because we think they're our truth. It couldn't be our truth if it isn't everybody's truth.
Well, there's a little joke of a saying, you're never going to win an argument with crazy, right? And it's just like, you have to have the perception of understanding like how healthy the other person is as well, right? And like when to walk away and when the argument isn't there. And that's, when I think my thoughts, it leads to obsession. Obsession leads to anxiety, delusional thinking, fear, and then reaction, which sometimes, many times, doesn't need a reaction, because, and it's just like, and the mind can be very powerful. If I sit on my couch all day and just say, I'm not going to drink and use, I'm not going to drink and use, I'm not going to drink and use, I'm going to go out and drink and use, because the mind slants, because I'm just in myself. But when I go out and help others, or when I go out and take action, or when I go out to a meeting, or when I go out and give to somebody else struggling with me, I'm out of myself and out of my mind. I have a guy in my life who was crying against the wall his first meeting. His wife left him. He couldn't get sober. He gave me his number. Our first conversation was 2.5 hours long. And we have built a very, very close relationship. And I have guided him. And I'm one of the guys that have helped guide him and been there on a highly consistent basis. And, I've been going through some things the last 6 months, most of them good, but also some other things. And I wind up talking to him as one of my guys now, because I wind up trusting him. And if he could open up to me, I can open up to him. And he's, and it's been watching the whole process of, it has been really beautiful. I have to say that I have, the two people on this podcast right now, you and Nancy, are two very beautiful people in my life, of honesty and integrity and laughter, and, continually doing the work. And, Nancy lost a husband of 30 years, and she shared her story of numbness and disbelief for a good 2 years. And she told me how she, started getting out of the house and started entering society and started meeting people for the first time, and being alone for the first time. And, Jack, and last year lost a daughter, and I watched you go through that. And, my mom's 84 years old, and she's the most important person in my life. I've never lost somebody this important to me. And, but 84 years old is a good long life, and the life that she's been living the last few years has been lesser and lesser, and my sisters have been taken care of, and I came to acceptance on that, and I came to be grateful for that. And truly, one of the ways I was able to find gratefulness for that is to see, like you two, along with a few others, lose people, maybe much earlier than we feel they should leave us, and walk through it with grace and strength and resiliency. And I listened today, when this happened to my mom, this feeling of hollowness inside of me and emptiness, and has been over me. And I said, it must have been really torturous, tedious, painful for them. And I said, but if they can do it with grace, and I've literally said this, if they could do it with grace and have strength and seem to be acting in society with happiness and, appreciation, I can too. And that's one of the things that I've, have drawn into. So, I want to say that you two have been two big examples for me, and I want to say thank you. And something beautiful has happened to me during this process. My mom's like 90 pounds right now. Her breasts are gone. Her one arm doesn't work. She can't walk. She can't open her one eye. She's missing her hair. Her hair's coming out. She can't talk very well. She sleeps about 22 hours a day. And you know, and and I'm still grateful because, she had a really good long life. And I'm going to think of the other 98% of her life that was really good, instead of just concentrating on this last, 2 weeks, and maybe the next 2 weeks. And being mature enough to understand that it's part of life, like dying is part of life. And, I am with people that believe that there's something out there after we pass. And I won't hang out with people that I will hang out with people and talk to them, but I won't talk to them about this subject, that there's nothing after life. I don't want to believe that. I do research. I listen to YouTube. I read books about the afterlife. And I believe that my mom is going to a greater place. And I've never seen God, and I've never touched God. And I believe in God. And I have believed in God, and beautiful things happen, even when they act like they're not beautiful at the time. If I have patience and don't make the solution worse than the problem, eventually it'll be part of my life, or it will go away. But I will deal with it as best as I can, with the help of others and with myself and with my God. And and I will get through this. And my job right now is to believe that my mom is going to be a super angel for me, and also to put the gun down, so to speak, with my sisters, and just to be love with them, and not win the argument with them, and to let them be in charge, or to let them be heard, and try to say yes to them. So, it's been a really, really good experience. And
well, and in it also is pain and emotion and a sense of loss. Whether the sense is legitimate or not is irrelevant, because the connections that we have with people, I realized with my daughter, grief and mourning was a tribute to my relationship with her. Yes. It wasn't something I was condemned to feeling. It was actually a byproduct of the value I had placed in our relationship that I didn't always value, in the degree to which it became obvious when she was gone. Because now her gone, all of the things she did that bothered me disappeared with the body she had. And what remained with me were all the virtuous things we shared in common. And my suspicion is, Nick, because I want to intercede on this, because it's very much part of our conversation here, is that as humans, we're not afraid of death. We're afraid of life. We're afraid of illuminating the aspects in our own psyche that we keep in the dark and make believe are true and real and who we are, when they're not. They're phobic, neurotic trances that we've hypnotized ourselves to make believe is who we are. And they aren't us. They're a self that we talk about as ego, a false self. How could a false self have any basis in reality if it's false any more than 2 + 2 is 5? You're never going to get that to work in the universe. And my experience with my daughter was that the leading cause of death was birth for all life forms. Mm-hmm. And to think of someone so pitifully as to imagine never having lived with them and think only of that aspect of them that's missing and not notice that that value that seems missing is coming from that entire experience you've had of them is not to give tribute to them, but to self-pitify the situation as something that shouldn't be happening or is a shame that it is happening, when in fact my suspicion is the bodily death, the body isn't life to begin with. It's a life form. It's based on an essence that we all share. It's based on an essence that is existence. It's based not on an optional, negotiable, something that we choose. It's based on a gift we all share. And I don't suspect your mother or anyone ever goes anywhere any more than our awareness of that present state is anywhere other than where we always are. Now and here, we're aware of it. You talked about God, not seeing God and not touching God, but understanding is how humans see things that are invisible and see things that seem to be buried and untouchable. And yet we're moved by those things, literally moved by them emotionally. And the emotions that you're feeling are a part of that process, that awareness. My sense is our awareness is so profoundly great and whole, and yet we dismiss it to try and reinforce the small ideas we have about the self we think we are, which aren't true at all.
Well, I mean, first of all, I am scared of death. But, you know, I was watching this documentary on life after death, and they interviewed 5 different people with 5 different personalities and nationalities and upbringings and located in different parts of the world. And they interviewed them, and they all had died and left their bodies and came back. And this one lady, for example, and I've shared this before, you know, her car went over a bank and upside down in a river, and she drowned, and she left her body, and it was the most beautiful experience she ever could imagine, and was glimmering and glistering. And, you know, she saw people from her past and knew people that were floating with her, and she heard music, and she said it was the most beautiful experience. And then they said, it's not your time. And she said, I don't want to go back. And she said, you have to understand, I had twin teenage boys who I adored, and I was still in love with my husband, and I adored him. My marriage worked. I loved my children, but I knew they were going to be okay, and I didn't want to go back. And they said, it's not your time. And she said, I came back, and she said what you said. She said, not only am I no longer scared of death, I'm no longer scared of life. And, you know, and I think that's why I used so much. I think I was overwhelmed. And the reason why I was overwhelmed so much, I was in my head, not sharing my fears, not asking for someone on this planet to trust, to have guidance. And, you know,
as though you were alone,
absolutely.
As though there was nobody. There's only 8.5 billion people, and we think we're alone.
Absolutely. And like,
think of that parade surrounding us all the time, and then thinking, because our thoughts have no basis in reality when we're entertaining them, we feel alone. What are we feeling? We're feeling the loneliness of a thought that has no place. It doesn't belong. It's insane to make believe those things are true. It's insane to struggle with them as though they'll someday be right, because they will always be wrong in that regard.
Right.
Right. Say anything.
No, right. I mean, it's for sure.
I'm kidding. But it's that sense of my sense is the body has an instinct not to want to die. Organisms want to survive. That's how nature works.
You know, I can't figure it out. I mean, I did horse value. I mean, I still have a hard time driving past a racetrack, but that's a joke there. But I did I did so much drugs. To be alive in itself, just from the amount of drugs and alcohol that I did, is a miracle. And then there's some out there that do drugs for their first time and they OD. So I don't get it. All I know is I'm very grateful that God made me an example of what happens when you hit a complete rock bottom and what happens when you surrender and come back to the rooms, instead of being an example of what happens when you go out one more time, right? And for that, that is so clear to me. I mean, I had a guy with 17 years, and his name is John, and he had a strong presence in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And after 17 years, he relapsed, and he just OD'd about a month ago. And he was out for about 9 months. And you know, my friend Mary says, every time someone ODs, I say, how is that not Nick Hines? How is that not Nick? You know, I just delete my last name. How is that not Nick? And you know, it doesn't matter how it wasn't me. The point is that I'm truly grateful for this, you know, second chance at life. Actually, like 27th chance at life, right? So it's all
So, and now,
beautiful. And one of the things, Jack, that my mom said to me, so my mom was kicking and screaming my first 4 days there. And she said, what kind of God would my mom went to Bible study for 25 years. She went to church, she prayed, she read the Bible, she believed in God, she talked to me about God. And on her, you know, on this deathbed of hers now, you know, and the beginning stages of dementia, you know, she said, what kind of God would do this to her? I'm afraid to die. Right. And I wasn't able to have a conversation with her. And it was heartbreaking to me that I wasn't going to be able to have one good conversation left, flying 3,000 miles away with my mother. And I just prayed and I said, God, please let me have one more conversation with her. And, you know, the next day, the nurse came in and said, we're going to switch her medicine. And they switched her medicine, and they went from a pain medicine to an anxiety medicine, and she became balanced and present. And we were able to have a beautiful conversation for about 20, 25 minutes. And she said to me some things like, I want you to turn it down a notch. I want you to start enjoying life. I want you to do the work and then trust God and let it be, because he's in control, not you. And I want you to start enjoying this. He said, I want you to be good to Nancy, and I want you to be good to yourself. And like, these were things I didn't think she was capable of. And the power of prayer, which I believe, or, you know, I got one more conversation. And by the way, my father and I didn't talk the last 2 years of his life. Like, we just didn't. We had a beautiful, beautiful relationship. And my dad did a lot for his wife, his daughters, and for me, and for his household. And he always showed up working hard and giving. And Christmases and birthdays and vacations were beautiful. And so were Sunday dinners and sport games. And he did a lot of beautiful things. But we just had this relationship, you know, when you're, you know, in your teens and 20s, where it just, there was a defiance with me and a defiance with him, quite frankly. And we didn't talk the last 2 years of his life. And I never got to say goodbye to my dad or thank him for everything that he did. And I held on to what he didn't do, which was very, you know, and, you know, the miracle is I learned from that. And so I must have told my mom at least a half a dozen times, especially when she got cancer. And then about 5, 6 weeks ago, when my sisters told me it's a little bit more serious than it has been, everything she's done for me. I've acknowledged what a beautiful mother she was, how lucky I am, and how thankful I am, and that she was the anchor of the family, and how much I loved her and how much I appreciated her. And she was able to tell me how she's glad I got sober, and how she witnessed my comeback, and that I made something of myself. And, you know, and that's what I learned from that, you know, that really big mistake with my father, is that I'm not going to do it with my mother. And I'm so thankful for that. And I have been praying to my father, you know, gone to him, all has been forgiven. And I believe that there's a really strong connection. And life is tough for me without children, right? And overwhelming for me without children, right? And I do pretty well. Um, and so I've understood how it might be hard for my father, right? And like the bills coming in, the work, the personalities at work, being in a long relationship for, you know, 40 plus years with my mother. And, I go to all these meetings. I did 202 meetings my first 90 days. I've worked the steps. I have people like you. I have people like Nancy. I have other people I get to share, right? I go to therapy and I still struggle, right? Sometimes with people, places, and
Well,
things. And,
and
but
that's
real quick, my father didn't have any of that. Alcoholics Anonymous, Addiction Anonymous, that wasn't really prevalent back when they were growing up. It wasn't nearly as available in South Philadelphia, especially, as it is in California, and especially in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. So he didn't have anyone or any program or any roadmap to get out of self or out of pain. And he just showed up every day and worked. And when I look at it like that, I just said, you know what? He did the best he could. And I'm thankful. I'm thankful that, for what he did instead of what he didn't do it. And I'm going through it right now with work. I own my own company and I've done a lot of beautiful things for people. And I could do 19 beautiful things. And they will look at the one thing I didn't do and they'll hold on to that like a dog on a bone. And I want to say, and I've learned to stop saying, I've done all this for you. And I just let it be. And so I'm starting to realize, like, he did the best I'm not starting to realize, I have realized that he's doing the best he could. And like my job now is to let those people go and to be grateful for the good people in my life and to constantly look at my part in things. You know, it's all good.
maybe in their essence, they're not gone.
Yes.
Maybe in a timeless, boundless dimension, which wouldn't even be a dimension because that would be based on dimensions, which most of the dimensions go to infinity very quickly beyond 4, 5, and 6. They start very quickly becoming infinite. If that's the case, then you're not talking about something that can come or go or could be more or less than. And if that essence is our essence, then all the other struggles we created were things we did, things we thought, things they thought, things we clashed about over thoughts, not about reality. Preferences we had, ideas we had about who we were and had to then be and fight for. Those weren't things coming from reality. They were coming from a possibility of reality, but they were being induced by our own limited thinking as being reality, those conflicts, those things. And that awareness is a profound approach to noticing. You mentioned life after death. You know that I did a whole bunch of stuff. During COVID, I studied life after death. And there's a guy in the country named Bruce Grayson, doctor, and I think University of Virginia. And he wrote a book called Afterlife. And in 1973, when he was getting his doctor's degree, he was in an emergency room. He was next to the emergency room. He was apprenticing in the emergency room. And he was having lunch. And while he had lunch, he got a stain on his tie. So he buttoned up his coat and he went into this girl had been brought in overdosed. And he sat with her and he took her friend out into the hallway and said, "What do you think she could have taken? We can't figure it out as quickly as you might know. Tell us what you might know about what she took." So he had a conversation with her outside the room. The next day, the girl came out of the coma and he said to her, "I was talking to your girlfriend." And she said, "I know." And he said, "What do you mean you know?" And she said, "Well, you were talking to her in the hallway." And he said, "You were in a coma. How would you know?" So he started thinking, he said, "I'm a scientist." Now I started thinking, how could they have arranged this to come up with this plan and deceive me in this way? And then he started thinking, I'm a scientist. Maybe I should give a little credit to what she's saying, and maybe she knows something I can't even imagine she knows. So he started opening up to the idea. And she said to him, I said, I also noticed that you had a stain on your tie that you tried to cover up before you came into the room. And he said, she couldn't have made that up because it wasn't a conspiracy with a friend. It was something she clearly knew. So he went about starting, this is now back in 1973. Before 1973, when the idea of near-death experiences, that terminology had never been used before. Because people who had experienced that if they had a job within the government, were fired because they were considered insane. They would say, well, if you're thinking that, you either don't admit it and don't tell us, and if you do, we have to fire you because that's crazy. You're crazy. You can't work in the government. You're crazy.
And if anything, we've come to know is that everybody in the government is sane.
Yes, exactly.
So,
So that environment. But the point
mm-hmm.
is, it's 1973. I was in high school in 1973, right? That isn't that long ago that humans have come to the point where they began to actually grasp that maybe something more than we think is actually happening in this universe. And maybe it's not some small part that we're playing on a planet that seems so small when we think of it in relative terms, but it's a part we're actually playing with the exact essence of that entire universe right now. And we're not playing a part, we're actually expressing the potential of that absolute knowing awareness that we have, that is our fundamental basis for thinking.
Right.
That's stable. If something doesn't change, there's no instability in it. There's no chance for it to be more or less. There's no chance for it not to be enough. It's already everything. And the book talks about, especially in the first step, all powerful. What we need is a spiritual experience, because what we've been doing is creating an experience that isn't based in spirituality. It's based solely in subjective mentality, and has created a depressing, anxious, nervous disorder in our systematic thinking that's been pathological through human history, to allow people to think that oppressing, suppressing, and killing other people is the only thing they can do and the only right thing to do. Self-righteous indignation has littered history with empires that conquered people, killed people to keep them in order, and every one of them fell apart and failed at some point. All of them consistently started with corruption within. If our thinking is corrupt, that those empires are a metaphor on a social level. The social ills of those empires are a metaphor for the sick thinking we're doing in our own experience. The corruption of the idea that all I am is what I think, and as a result, all I am is the body that I think within. And why would we kill that body if we didn't think it was the sole source of the problem? Suicide's at an all-time high.
They have agnostic meetings, and I'm saying you have meetings to talk about something that doesn't exist, that you believe that doesn't exist.
No, you'd never hear God more than in the atheist meeting.
Right. So you're taking time to prove that something doesn't exist. And it's just like, talk about and this is, with all due respect, everybody's got their own journey and beliefs, but but to do the research on something that does exist and to believe in that. And if it just makes you feel good and just keeps you on the right path, I would rather believe, in God and find out that there wasn't, instead of believing that there wasn't a God and finding out that there was. And so we've been doing a lot of the talking. And what are your thoughts, Nancy?
There's so much. There's so much. I mean, we are not our thoughts. I mean, we are not our thoughts. And so when we become aware that we are, the observer of our thoughts, I mean, that's a pretty powerful awareness to come to. I think Jack, you said so many, deep things that I connected with, as far as loss and grief. And, when we lose somebody, we have this opportunity to, to love in a way that we never experienced while they were physically with us. And it can be a deeper love than we really ever knew. So, we all have equal access to that experience when we lose somebody that we love. And I think I think our time here as humans is something that I want to say we signed up for. We've come here for a certain amount of time. And when we leave this body, it's going to become so clear what it's all about.
Yeah.
I have, I didn't always until I lost my late husband. I really didn't have any experience with with this at all. And so I chose to just do a deep dive into all of it, and it's changed me completely in so many ways, and I feel grateful for that chance to think differently, and to believe differently, and to live in a different way. So it's being open, it's being aware, and you know, so
My sense, Nancy, is that we are in that place we think we'll end up being once the body is gone right now. And my question is, think of how far we have to go mentally to make believe we're not.
mm,
And that a real belief is not in God. Our belief is in a God of our own understanding that is limited in scope, because he only gives us the things we think we need, and most of the things we think we need are sick, because we're trying to fill a hole that can't be filled, because we're not conceding the essence as already complete and whole, and that is the basis of our absolute existence. And it's not just the basis of mine, but yours and everything else too, simultaneously.
mm-hmm.
And if that is our present right now, and the presence of the present is in fact what we all share in common, then this other sick nature that all the 12-step programs are built on are based in suffering. The common nature of the suffering is what draws people together, because they can commonly discuss it and start to open up about it, rather than feel that they need to close off and defend and isolate and start to build a big protective organization with militaristic tendencies to try to protect itself, which as humans have been doing through history.
Yeah.
We're the only species that has developed armor to kill the same species that we're from, based on a thought. No other species is doing that on Earth.
Based on a thought.
Based on thinking.
Yeah.
So if our thinking right now has been, my sense is the present is the sum total, the accumulation of everything that has ever happened and everything that can happen at the same time. There is no real past. There is no real future. Those are just imagined ideas about a time that doesn't any longer exist, and a time that may someday exist. But the future is always present, and the past was always present when it actually occurred.
You know, these wars are created typically, many, because they want more. They want more land. And instead of just concentrating on what they have and making that better.
But you and I,
and that's the same with me and you, right? It's
you and I fund funding the mental problem by not noticing the absolute nature of everyone is absolute and everything is absolute. The degree to which we falter in that and make believe that, well, I have enough of what I need, so now I'm comfortable and I think I can offer a little bit of it to others, is to think they don't have it already. If we already have it, we just haven't been sharing it very well. We've been acting as though we don't have it. So we've been thinking having enough is enough, when in fact that idea is always somewhat challenged by other needs we may think we have, or other wants we may think we have, that become needs in that sense that we have to have it, which is an addictive thought. Think of the word have as a possessive, and we use it as a demand. I have to do something. That's not what the word has always been a possessive. If I have something to do, that's a lot different than I have to do something. I just have a thought, I'm going to do something. That's a commitment. That's a choice I can make, and I can act on that choice. But to think I have to do it now turns it into that backward, absolutely contrary idea that I can't live without it, have to have it, and I'm going to compromise my ethics, my morals, to be sure I get it, come what may, regardless of what damage I have to cause to get it. Even in those subtle terms that seem to be too small to notice, we notice, because a perfect pond at perfect ease, the smallest pebble in that pond will ripple across the entire thing. The effect is noticeable, and the denial, you were talking about sensitivity, I think, Nancy, or desensitivity, the numbness, maybe Nick mentioned it, the idea of sometimes these experiences we have are so profound, we go numb to it because we don't know how to actually experience the fulfillment of the moment. the absolute fulfilling aspect of the moment, which can be so dramatic compared to the work we've been doing to try to deny and defend and feel numb to what's happening.
Right. Right.
Because that movement all of a sudden is so, facing death is actually the beginning of facing life. Every episode of it's like a book that ends, but there's another sequel to it. We're all sequels to all these people that we have missed and think are gone in some way.
Well,
And the tribute to them is the willingness we have to stand up a little taller and a little more ably and start facing things accurately enough to see that we're all doing the exact same thing wrong, while the right thing we have is being overlooked as being something we need to get and have more of, and I need to have great faith in. If I have faith in something that's faithful, I need very little faith for it to prove and confirm that it is in fact faithful. Very little faith. If I have faith in faithless things, there's never going to be enough of that to turn those things into reality.
You know, Jack, one of the beautiful things that have happened visiting my mother and seeing her and coming to terms with it is there's something strong going on with me. There's an appreciation for life, almost an inspiration and a new feeling towards life with confidence and, happiness and, gratefulness. It's not my turn to die with my mother. It's my turn to appreciate the life that she's had and what she's done for me and to take that a step further. And I have truly gained that. And it's just I'm very surprised the positivity that has come from this for me and how I'm embracing it. And I have my moments of tears, and of course I will. And it's just but I realize I'm starting to do some really beautiful things with my life and see the world in a beautiful way. And I'm super grateful. For some people, I remember I met a person, in AA, and I said, every time I see you, you seem to be a little bit sad. And she said, my boyfriend and I broke up. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And I said, how long were you together? And she said, we're, 3 years. And I said, oh, how long have you been apart? And she said, we broke up 4 years ago. And it's just that's sad. Right. And it's just some people need, they just don't, and I don't know if that's genetics. I don't know if that's defiance or, whatever, where I'm just grateful of this what's going on with me right now. I'm very truly inspired. And a lot of that is my mom being an optimist and appreciating life. She had a beautiful laugh. And, one of the reasons why I was so excited to do this podcast today with you and to invite Nancy is that the three of us, have been gone through this, you two a lot longer than me, but also to share with others, it's a beautiful thing in some ways. It's of course painful, and much deeper than others, your two stories than mine. But there's a lot of lessons in pain, and sometimes it takes longer and there's work to be done, and we're not robots. We're going to feel and we're going to crumble a little bit and just need to sit, or just sleep or, but you two have been a big inspiration to me. And and I really believe that hearing your stories and you two sharing with me your stories has consciously or subconsciously helped me look at things differently right now. And I'm grateful. And this whole journey of getting honest and hitting a rock bottom, it brought me here right now. The definition of alcoholism is emotional immaturity. Drinking and using are but a symptom. When something good happens to me, I get a big check, or, it's just I'm the greatest guy in the world. Look at me. I'll never have another problem. I go really, really high. Right. And that sets off endorphins, right, and excitement. And I need to drink and use to calm that down. Right. So I bring the highs down. And when something bad happens to me, my mom's the only person ever die on this planet, or I'll never get out of this financial situation, or I'll never meet another woman like her again, I go really, really low. And that low reaction sets off endorphins, and I need to drink and use to numb that. And so emotional immaturity the opposite is being mature. And I bring the highs down and accept good things with grace and thankfulness. And when something bad happens, I talk to people and I understand it's part of life and to bring those lows up. And I try my very best to get out of that and just understand like there's going to be more that happens to me too. And it's just like, so, but I've had a very good life, they've all been beautiful lessons. And I used to hate my life every day. I regretted my life, my circumstances, what I did. And
So
I look
let me
back and
intercede there for a
I
second,
look
Nick,
back and I look back and I wouldn't change a thing.
before you move off that point. That hatred is actually a recognition of the hatred we have for the self we think we are, that we're constantly maintaining and acting as though it's happening to us rather than seeing it's being caused by us. It's a misuse of our own thinking to make believe that not only is our thinking maybe right or wrong, but it always has to. When I'm thinking obsessively, it's always got to be right, because the basis of a lie is that it isn't true being thought of as true. So that whole polarity begins to occur. This idea that it can be the one thing it can't be is the idea of an obsessive thought. Why is it obsessive? Because I have to think about it constantly to make believe that it's true, because I'm consumed with it now. And the real substance abuse is not the drugs we take on the outside that we blame, because none of those drugs ever ingested themselves into our system without our help. No heroin ever jumped in a hypodermic needle and chased us around and injected itself into us. No cork snorted itself up. We were absolutely instrumental in every one of those steps. But the real substance abuse are the chemicals you're describing. Our body has the capacity to develop chemicals that are so far beyond any laboratory on the planet. And we talk about it in terms of the highs and lows, but we don't talk about it as a potential that could create the kind of chemicals that would allow us to do things that we would presently think are unimaginable. Like the endorphins allow people to do things, like the grandmothers who pick up the car off their grandkid. All of a sudden, they seem to have perfect strength when they know they need to do something. They're not thinking about it. They're doing what they can do because they know they can do it, and they go ahead and do it rather than get stuck in the whole mental masturbation over whether they should or shouldn't, or think they may be able to or not able to.
Jack, are you allowed to use the word masturbation on this podcast?
This is a masturbation. So the point I'm making is that we set off the basic instinct of a life form is to survive. And the instincts we have, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn now has been added to that, which is to make nice to an enemy, thinking you can postpone their potential intent, risky threat intent. It's really to help manage threats and risks. And it's a healthy thing to have. That fear, when there's a real threat, is actually a guidance system to help us make decisions in relation to what's happening that would potentially save us from the peril that might otherwise occur if we did nothing at all. Here's what happens in addiction. Because we're basing our thought of who we are on a lie, it all gets backwards. What's the fight? Reactiveness, defensiveness, denial. What's the consequence? Freezing. It's flight, freeze, fawn. So here we fight, we're reacting, we're denying what we're doing.
Well, you go to all these...
The flight is the idea that we can escape it. What do we escape it into? Compulsions, impulsiveness, try to get somewhere else, be somewhere else, got to have something else at some other time, somewhere else, etc. What's the freezing? We're numb. We become desensitized. I'm not doing it. I have nothing to do with it. Because I can think that way. I think that way is actually reality rather than a delusion about reality. And the new one, the fawn, is people pleasing. And you and I have dealt with this in your business, this idea that if you're nice to people, they're going to do more, when in fact, if you're nice to someone sick, they're going to do more sick things as a result.
Absolutely.
And it's beginning to learn where that line is between help and no help. And what I learned with you and others was there was a point at which I didn't always trust you. To me, it doesn't matter whether I trust people or not. If they're interested in help, I'll give it to them. But when I start to see the help I'm giving isn't helping, I stop giving that. And sometimes it takes me some evidence before I'm clear in my own understanding and my own insensitivity that I've developed over time to make believe that I'm the big crusader of help because I think I'm helping, when in fact I'm helping myself to the idea that I'm a big help. That isn't helpful. So getting to those points takes a minute because of the desensitization. My tension in my body is a way of desensitizing my experience. My blood isn't flowing well. The water isn't getting where it needs to go. The minerals, the vitamins, all of those things are depressing my body's ability to actually experience what's happening. That isn't healthy. It's literally the roots of dis-ease. Constipation, both physically and emotionally, is part of that, trying to cut off that source, trying to think because it's uncomfortable, I need to get away from it, rather than say it's uncomfortable because there's no basis to the thought. And I'm making believe it's true. I'm making believe it's real. I make believe I'm going to wring something out of it if I think of it more. If I spend more time on the sick thinking and go in this vicious cycle, someday it's going to come true magically. That's fantasy as reality. That is insanity in any definition or by any definition. If that's what we're struggling with, talking about it publicly and openly is a chance to begin to look at our process and see that our processes may have different circumstances, different people, different places, different things, but the root corruption is the same exact idea, that our thinking is reality, and it must be as a result right, and it must be something worth defending and fighting for. And that's who I think I become, but I will never be that, and feel hopeless in the process. Depression today is at an all-time high. Look at the people who are doing these insane things, thinking it's a solution, killing kids in elementary schools, then other people denying that it even happened for the sake of drawing an audience so they can be popular. Think of the insanity that's going on. This is not an accident. It's a coincidence, a simultaneous incidence of beginning to look at what we have been doing collectively and thought that it was a secret. And the secret has never been a secret, because our bodies have secreted anxiety and tension and hatred and vengeance and spite and all the contempt through history to try to escape it and try to prove somebody else is wrong. And we're going to feel better because we damn them for the thing we're damning. It is nuttiness at a all-time high. We have enough people on the planet now to be seeing it more visibly than we ever have. It's worth talking about.
Were you going to say something, Nancy?
No, I just keep coming back to, to the thoughts, and there's such a huge, beautiful awareness and an awakening when we get to sit with and discover that we have that beautiful power of looking at our thoughts and deciding whether or not we want to keep that thought, whether we want to try on a different thought. It's a lovely awakening to realize that. And so through meditation, I came to that space of being able to sit with my thoughts and understanding how much power I have over the way I look at my thoughts and what I do with them, and how that affects how I feel. So when we talk about emotional immaturity, the emotions don't come from the circumstance, really. The emotions come from what I'm thinking about at the time.
Yeah.
And when I get to sit with that and I realize that I have so much, it is all within me. It's all within me. Everything out there is a circumstance. Every single thing is a circumstance. And it is all within me. So many different, I feel like there were so many different areas covered today, and it's been great. I love to witness and listen to this conversation between you and Nick.
Well, you were a part of it too.
And when we get into the loss and all of that, that's a whole thing too. So thank you for including me on that.
Very happy to. The word intuition used in the big book, it says we will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. So I'm going to present this as just a concept to consider, like all of this is. I don't want to tell anybody what to think or do. I want to simply share experience and have things considered. But intuition is defined as knowledge beyond reason, meaning it's not thinking. It's just an awareness of knowing. That knowing, Nancy, that you're describing, that awareness of starting to see your thoughts, is the knowingness that we already have. The observer is the awareness of knowing. We wouldn't be seeing the thoughts if we were the thoughts. We would be in the thoughts. And just like if we're dreaming, we're in the dream. We think the dream's real, but we wake up and say, oh, that was a dream. And all of a sudden, all the somatics go away with the awareness that, oh, that was a dream. The heart racing and all that stuff that may be coming out of the sense of being chased or being threatened in some way, all of a sudden starts to vanish. But we do it as a daydream and a sleepwalk, making believe that these things we don't think we know aren't happening, when in fact we absolutely know the symptoms we're struggling and suffering from and the conflicts that are occurring, and we're misreading them by making believe we don't know what's going on. We in fact do. And my sense is that through that period of time, as you're describing, that you thought you didn't know, the knowing awareness in the big book, it talks about the bedevilments. They're all those sort of decrepit conditions that are created that keep us at odds with everyone and everything else, in some way defending something that's indefensible because it's literally a delusion to think it even exists. For me to think that the insanity of an illusion becomes reality is to realize that there's nothing there to defend. And that freedom, you were sort of describing that too, Nick, where you begin to see that your dad did what he did. And you know what's happened in history? Everything that's happened in history. And you know what it is? Everything right now is a sum total of all that. We are still witnesses to that entire history, including the fact that our body is a genetic representation of every interaction that has ever occurred between all humans through the beginning, from the absolute beginning.
And when I look at my father, or even my mother on some of the things that they didn't do or I wasn't happy with, or I want to blame them, like it's a reason not to look at my situation. It's a reason to not look at myself, or it's a reason that I didn't change. Like I said, everything I loved about my dad and my mom, I became, but everything I hated about my mom and my dad, I became. I'm still holding on to that. And it's just like, it's just an excuse not to look at myself and do the work. And so, look, they weren't perfect and stuff like that. But after a while, it's like, well, then change it. I know
my sense is, my sense though is, as much as we can capture what we call our conscious awareness, that there is an awareness we have that we think is unconscious, and as a result think we have nothing to do with. So the things that are really bothering any of us, that bother us, are not the things we're thinking about, but the things we don't think we're thinking about, and the things we don't think we have anything to do with as a result. And to begin to consider that is actually to put the pieces, the black and the white of the yin and the yang together, and start to see that they're actually, I'm hiding things where I think are in the dark, and then wonder why I suffer from shadows of doubt or cast shadows of doubt in my experience. I'm manufacturing that condition to make believe it's not there because the lights are off and I don't see it, just like kids seem to be afraid of ghosts. And no matter how many times you turn the lights on, they still want to sleep with the lights on. They don't want the lights to go off. Doesn't matter how many times the lights come on and there's no ghost there. It's not enough for them, right? Same way it's not enough for us to go back and back and back to the same wrong thing and think someday it'll be enough. That same thinking doesn't disappear because we have some awareness about a single symptom. It becomes illuminated as a potential to look at in total, rather than in the bits and pieces that seem to rationalize that we've done the work, we've done enough, and now I can skip along and be merry while I'm looking at a world that is failing miserably in many respects. And people are in misery in many respects that I want to think have nothing to do with me because it's over there somewhere and not here now, when in fact it is absolutely here now with us. And we have the absolute capacity to affect it in a way that would eliminate it and bring light to it, rather than make believe that it's just going to go on. It's just the way humans are. We consider human nature to be greedy and selfish and all that. That is not human nature. That is the nature of an obsessive thinker on Earth. Yeah. That's crazy to make believe it's something that's natural for us when it is abnormal and unhealthy and unnatural. And to think of it naturally is to start to see there is a lot of unnatural stuff going on that is abnormal. And to normalize it is the desensitization of it. The idea that if I don't feel it and think about it, it isn't happening. That's just fantasy. Talk about immaturity. Maturity in species, in fruit, means people get sweeter, or the fruit gets sweeter as it ripens and eventually rots if it isn't eaten. With humans, we don't tend to get a lot sweeter with age.
You said
we
it's
get
not,
bitter.
and you say it's not organic thinking, it's not natural thinking. And how does like that kind of thinking, how do we get there with that kind of thinking, that destructive thinking? And it's typically synthetics, right? So stuff that's man-made that we put into our system that pollutes the mind. So like, the homeless
No.
crisis.
The Nancy was just describing the fact that you can choose your thoughts and start to see that you're choosing your thoughts, that we are making up the choices we have, and then we call it our makeup as though somehow it's imposed on us because we think it's reality. We think we're making up reality when in fact all we're doing is manifesting effects within existing reality. If reality is absolute, we can't make it up or take from it. There is no lack in it. There is no more or less in it.
But let me just complete what I was starting. But my thing is, what I've noticed is, and we've talked about this, the homeless crisis, the jail crisis, right? 90% of the people there's mental illness with jails and homelessness. Would you agree with that?
I would agree there's mental illness with all humans. I don't think this is an inequitable sickness.
Right. But the depths that it leads to jail and homelessness, it's just like, I think curiosity to pick up, to try cocaine or to try a drink, right, is but like what it then does to you and leads you down is what I'm talking about, because it's synthetic.
It's the thinking, though, that causes the obsession to go back to something that clearly we can't handle.
But that's what I'm saying, though. But because the synthetics got into our system, doesn't it warp the decision to make that second choice because it's polluted? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, but my sense is, Nick, you're describing basically everything that is addictive is concentrated. We've taken something that's natural, and then we've concentrated, like alcohol is distilled, so it's reduced down to its most impactful state. And cocaine, same thing. If you chew coca leaves, which they did for years, it's very subtle, like drinking tea, very subtle, like having a Coke, right? A little sugar. It just gives you a little boost. When you take acetone and burn it down to the most stimulative aspect, now you're introducing something to a body that's organic that doesn't know how to deal with that stuff. But we're doing that in our own system. The idea of substance, the idea that a lie is basically imagining that it has substance. Yeah. Since a lie has no substance, the real substance abuse is imagining a lie is true. Mm-hmm. A lie isn't a lie if it's a lie. If a lie is a lie, that's true. It's a lie. There's no impact on that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
A lie by nature is thought to be something false as truth, something wrong as right. That's what a lie is. It's an impossibility, which is why obsessive thinking is required to constantly think about it, because it will never come true. It will never be what the claim is. The one thing the claim is that it's reality, is the one thing it can never be. That impossibility turns our chemical system in our body completely upside down, because our body is not designed to process insanity. It's designed to function in relation to reality. That's how we're designed. And it isn't happening to us. It's being caused by us because of the thinking we do in relation to what's happening, as Nancy described. It's not the circumstances, it's what I'm thinking about them that is either damning me or giving me a sense of enlightenment and freedom.
And all of that happens without any drugs or alcohol on top of it. And so
exactly.
So we all know people, and I'll give you, I don't want to talk about my mother because she's not healthy, but she lived a life of non-truths, I will say. Everything was, and it became so embedded in who she was. She'd it was from the smallest of things that were not truth. And her untruth became really, the core of it was never really getting to know herself and who she was, and just living untruth over untruth over untruth. She was never a substance or an alcohol abuser in any time, but she lived a life very similar to that because there was just never any truth in her sense of who she was and what she did, and it created such disease in her body. But I'm hearing what you said for really for the first time in a very different way, Jack. So it was, I don't know, I just heard it in a very different way right now. So
my sense is, Nancy, that you're describing your mother's inheritance of the totality of human endeavor. We have been thinking this way since the beginning of written history, to have justified Adam killing his brother. Think of that. There's two kids on earth, according to the story, and one of them kills the other one. So if there were any other parents to ask Adam and Eve how the kids are doing, well, Cain is dead, or Abel is dead, and Cain kills them. Great. The kids are fine. Oh, we're having a wonderful time. That's an early story. I don't know if it's true. I don't care if it's true.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me is that it's been told for this long and it isn't looked at as a mental issue.
Yeah.
It was about the apple and it was about Eve. It's interesting that we blamed Eve for eating the apple while men ended up with Adam's apple stuck in their throat, choking on their words, literally. Think of the female abuse that has been caused over that story by people who think the woman is to blame at all times, even today. And if a woman is raped in certain countries and certain philosophies, they get killed because they've dishonored the family and the guy who raped them doesn't. Goes on today. Now, talk about immaturity. Talk about a lack of insight, a lack of perspective, a lack of awareness, a lack of honesty. To make believe that that truth is so pervasive that a whole species, the species that actually gives us the humanity that perpetuates the species, is guilty for something that happened in some garden somewhere in North Africa, however long ago. Think about the shame and the guilt and the unforgiveness and the spite and the contempt still bleeding through the bodies that are designed to bleed internally, and yet we do it externally just as a show of force and a show of control and a show of somehow a prowess. It's sick. It is insane. And we're witnessing it every day in some new absurd way. People think if they do it new and absurd, they kill 11 people in Vancouver with a car, they're the new champion. This thinking starts with each of us looking at reality. If reality is real, Course in Miracles says reality is real, period. And it's all that exists, period. So unreality, things we can imagine are real, don't exist except in thought. The whole concept of ego as a word is etymologically based on the word I. But we use the word I am thinking to myself. So we have a split personality, even in our own context of conversation. I am talking to myself. Well, no, actually, I talk to my thoughts. I don't talk to myself. There's no self there. Mm-hmm. There's just thoughts about thinking itself that we've determined as our self. And now we're trying to manicure that self into something legitimate when it's illegitimate from the beginning and it's corrupted its core and it's never going to be an edible apple, ever. Mm-hmm. It's always going to be rotten. So my sense is if we talked about this more honestly and openly together, we would see things naturally and automatically that would otherwise seem invisible to us because of the perpetuation of the ideas that seem to be in this subterranean state we call the subconscious. And we talk about that as a place we don't know anything about. But it's interesting how openly we talk about it as someplace we don't know anything about and how convenient that thinking is to say it, to speak so confidently as not knowing it. When in fact, if we're the ones creating it, who else would know anything about it but each of us?
Yes.
So the fact that the capacity is there, as far as I can tell, is what love has offered us and the freedom we have to think whatever we want. People say, why would God allow this? And I said, why would God condemn us not to do it if it loved us enough to give us the freedom to be absolutely free? These are decisions we're making. They're not things being held by some spirit somewhere else in another heaven and another place at another time that are just pissed off because it can't seem to get back to us and have us do anything that we call behavior. So,
yeah.
So, Nick, my witness of you as a human in the face of losing your mother was very, very moving yesterday because you were very moved by the experience. And that movement is very fluid. And the tears, as far as I'm concerned, are just like laughter. They are releases of tension that we hold because some of the thoughts we have so dear are being dispelled by the rumor of those thoughts are being dispelled by the facing of things accurately and seeing the dramatic impact that happens when a body does disintegrate. And we watch it decay. And we watch, my dad had not been able to walk. He lost the control in one of his arms. His eye was out. And he kept, when we talked to him, he goes, I'm doing great. Everything's wonderful. I said, Dad, you could barely stand up. He was driving his car to a restaurant. And I said, Dad, you're going to kill somebody. I said, now I'm doing for you what you did for me when I was 14 and wrecked Mom's car.
Well, it's like one of the things that you have said, which has been consistent, you've shared with me a handful of times, maybe more, is that when we lose somebody that's close to us, we're always going to think we could have done more. And that, of course, came to my mind. I could have went back to Philadelphia more. But, I realized that was my looking to make things worse or, being hard on myself instead of realizing everything that I've done well. And so of course we're going to, right? Because we love them so much and we wanted to relieve them from their pain or have them still here or just, I don't know, but to know that you said that to me 5 or 6 times and to say this is what he's talking about, I knew that it was not serving anything. It was unhealthy thinking, and it's okay to think it, I guess. But there was just so much more good that I've done and living my life. And so it's just I just the whole experience was very sad, but there was a lot of goodness out of it. And I can't believe you let everybody listening to this podcast know that I was crying yesterday, Jack. Thank you.
Well, you started today, but you held back. So I appreciate it. As a man, I shared at my daughter's memorial. I said, I really did not grow up thinking that a goal would be to cry publicly and openly and feel refreshed by the opportunity to do that and just let it be.
Yeah.
I have 2 business partners. I have Nancy, I have you, I have a few other people that I've been sharing this with. And, I've broken down with all of them. And, I know I've shared with you that I feel like I've lost a lot of my friends in this, through the relapsing and then the journey. And, and you would say to me, you have a lot more friends than you think. And what I've realized is everybody was willing to listen to me and to be there for me, to check in on me. And that's another thing that's come out of this is that I realized I have a lot of close people in my life. And then they would share with somebody and I would get a phone call unexpectedly. There's been a lot of nice things that have come from this.
So if we're thinking in essential terms, and my sense is the problem with thinking about thinking is that it's a subsidy of an absolute state of being that we all have, that we all share. And I don't think there's an ultimate self that is anything other than something we absolutely share simultaneously and collectively. I don't think it's a lot of individuals floating around. My sense is that self is the same thing. If it's absolute, it's the same all the time. It doesn't change. That's a significantly different thing to think about the core of our essence because it becomes everyone's and something we all share. And then the question is, why don't we talk about this? Why do we spend so much time talking about the division and the distinctions?
And Jack, what's the definition of absolute?
What do you think?
It's exactly the way it is.
Well, it's absolute. It doesn't have any exceptions. There are no options. There are no choices. It is just as it is. In a capital IT, a capital IS. As things, God has always been capitalized. Proper names have been capitalized because we think of ourselves as gods, basically. We've been actually worshiping an ego that we think is us by thinking about it all the time. We're praying to this ego to get better by making believe more and more thought is going to get us there. It's not true.
Mm-hmm.
It cripples our ability to actually be aware of what's happening, while in fact that ability is never crippled. But within the context of the thinking, we think of those things as reality. So we think we're only what we think, and as a result, feel crippled and feel diminished and feel unable and feel like we don't know any better. And I will assure you that we would not know so clearly what's wrong in the world with everyone else if we didn't have a greater sense of what's absolutely right. It's interesting how sure we can be of what's wrong in the world and how uncertain we can be about our own culpability. And that, I would say, is worth talking about from an absolute point of view, because it becomes obvious quickly. People will say and do things they would never imagine saying and doing, because the fact of that intuition is actually inspiration and the nature, the essence of our existence, of our being existence, not the human relative experience we're having in a body that's designed to decay.
Yeah.
So talking about it and talking about it publicly is something that we have today through Zooms, through recording, through podcasts, Buzzsprout, all these different options, Anchor, are all options the world has to listen with a minimum amount of technology. And yet it's really just a metaphor for our already existing telepathic, harmonic convergence and symmetric, synchronous essence that we share all the time. We're never apart. We're never alone, because we are not our bodies. We are the essence of the essence. We share that in common. If it's worth talking about the suffering in relation to symptoms, it's worth talking about the inspiration versus the desperation of that suffering.
Yes.
And as far as I can tell, and Nancy, you've had plenty of experience in addiction and recovery, from what I understand. I make a choice as to whether I'm going to think in inspired terms or desperate terms. And to make believe when I'm in desperation that it's happening to me is exactly how the addictive cycle works, because I want to disown and disabuse myself of having anything to do with it. And it's the ultimate substance abuse, because I'm making believe that a thought with no basis is the basis of reality. That is insanity incarnate.
Yes.
Love you guys.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, and Nancy, come back. Let's
So
have a
much.
talk. I don't know your history that well and would like to hear more.
I was so not prepared for any of this, but so thank you, Nick.
Whoops.
But I really appreciated it. It was wonderful. I'd love to come back. A little more preparation next time. It's great.
Well, and my sense is that just the interaction, in my experience, gives me a chance to reinforce the ideas and start to develop a language that's actually commensurate with an absolute state of being, rather than one that's constantly trying to concoct some new ritual to have people feel a little better about what's wrong, but actually begin to dispel and literally dissolve rather than resolve the problem.
Yes.
Literally dissolve, saying it's nothing but what I think it is. If I think I have to defend something that doesn't exist, I must think something exists to defend. That's incredibly insane. It is literally living in a hallucination and a trance and acting as though that's reality.
Yes.
So wake up, smell the roses. By the way, the roses always smell good for the most part.
Yes, they do.
We don't have to smell them for them to be what they are. So
Well, Nancy is a big fan of that restaurant across the street from your house, and maybe the four of us could extend this conversation.
Well, I'd love, Katie is another light in my life, and she has her own struggles, and yet she's always diligent in looking and seeing and learning and growing and finding that light. She's not interested in living in the darkness, and yet she finds it. And I think if we're honest, we all have the capacity to do that. If we're free to do it, it doesn't mean we're condemned to it. It means we're
Yes.
choosing it. And that's a very different approach to saying, wow, if I am culpable for this, I am also capable of not starting it. The problem with addiction often is we're trying to figure out how to stop it rather than notice that we're actually culpable for starting it. If I keep starting it and thinking I can only stop it, I got a persistent problem that's never going to go away. And that's a very good definition of addiction.
Mm.
Nancy, that's Jack's way of saying he would love to go to dinner.
Great. I look forward to it.
Jack, this has been awesome. I mean, I love you very, very much. You have been just one of the greatest people in my life, and you've been there, and like I've learned so much from you, and I'm so excited that Nancy got to hear you and interact with you. She felt a very strong energy immediately from you and Katie, and has asked about you after just meeting you, briefly a number of times, and so I'm really glad the three of us were here.
Well, and my sister lives up at the Boulders, Nancy. So maybe at some point when we go visit her, we'll come see you in your
that would be wonderful.
In your neighborhood.
Oh, yeah, I'm right there. I'm not far away from there.
Yeah.
It's great.
Love you guys. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you for allowing me to say what I say, even at times when I'm cutting sentences short. And I only didn't do it when you were complimenting me, Nick. So thank you.
Okay.
See you guys.
Look forward to it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jack. Bye.